Scott Krystofiak is a community college of Baltimore County alum who attended the college from 2000 to 2002. He initially was interested in architecture, but later on his academic journey, he decided to change his focus to psychology. Before attending CCBC, Scott had just recently come out as gay. He did not feel fully comfortable, but at CCBC he discovered theater and the Rainbow Club, which helped him become his most authentic self. My name is Kyle Clark Echeverria, and today I'll be interviewing Scott. Could you please state your name, your pronouns, today's date, and the location for our interview?
Hello, my name is Scott Krystofiak. My preferred pronouns are he, him, and today is June 2024.
What is your current professional title and what do you do for work?
I am a licensed clinical psychologist working at a group practice in Alexandria, Virginia.
So, what initially drew you to CCBC and what campus did you attend?
I attended CCBC Essex campus from 2000 until 2002, and I graduated with a degree arts and sciences in arts and science.
And could you tell me a little bit more about your experience coming out as gay?
Sure, absolutely. So I came out in my senior year when I was in high school. So that was the end of 1999, going into 2000. And it was a really difficult time, just in terms of family and acceptance. So there was a lot of stress that I was dealing with at that time. When I was a student at CCBC, it was really a time for me to kind of get in touch with myself and to express my true authentic self. It was scary to do that, but I feel like while I was there, I was able to get connected to different groups and people that helped me to feel a lot more comfortable with expressing myself.
How did you identify within the LGBTQ community during your time at CCBC, and how did others identify, other students or professors as well?
I identified as gay, and a lot of this other students and professors that I encountered in the community, they would either identify as gay or lesbian. There may even been some trans folks too.
What can you tell me a little bit about how the overall campus climate for LGBTQ students, how that was during your time at TCBC?
I felt like the campus climate in general was pretty welcoming. I don't have too many experiences where I felt unwelcomed or unsafe. I had some professors who, they were very open about their own identities and, talked about various topics that were relevant to the LGBTQ community. It didn't happen in all classes, but in some classes. And so I feel like in general, it was a very open and accepting climate there.
Were there any instances where you felt unsafe as an LGBTQ student on campus, like any instances of bullying or anything like that?
I think of one time where I was walking with one of my friends who identified as gay, and I think as we passed a group of students, a slur was said, and there was some laughing, and my friend and I would just kind of shrugged it off and rolled our eyes and walked away. But really, that was the only incident that I had while I was a student there. Otherwise, again, it was just a pretty safe place for me to be, but also my peers who were part of that community as well.
So it seems like mostly your experience was positive on campus. So could you share any of those positive experiences you had as an LGBTQ student on the CCBC campus?
Absolutely. And you're 100% correct. They were generally positive. I think one experience I had that really stands out to me, it was my first semester at CCBC, and I'd taken, it was an honors class of American Pluralism, Search for Justice. And it was taught by Ingrid Sabio and Linda Zeidman. And we had to go around the room as a small class, and maybe, I would say 12 of us maybe. We had to go around the table and talk about a part of our identity that was really important to us. And that was the first time I feel like I could really own my identity as being gay, and to talk about that openly and feel this acceptance from students in the class and from the professor, it was really such a corrective experience. I would also say when I was in theater, just interacting with other students from the LGBTQ community, that was really important to me. And also, when as I'm thinking about other classes too that were important, my theater one class that was taught by Carl Frundell. Carl was and is an incredibly warm person and so supportive. And I remember taking acting one with him again my first semester, and there were some students in the class identified as LGBTQ, and it, just giving us the space to kind of be ourselves and to express ourselves in a very authentic way was so meaningful. So I'm really grateful for that experience. I also had a professor, F. Scott Black, who's my speech instructor, that may have been my second year at CCBC. And again, just very supportive individual, helped me to feel more comfortable with my own identity as a gay man, and to, again, just kind of find that confidence to express myself in a way that really was important to me.
Could you tell me about, well, you discussed some students in your story just now, and could you tell me about like how did being an LGBTQ student impact your social life and your relationship with peers? Maybe like peers that were not in the community, as well as those that were in the community.
I feel like I was still pretty closeted when I got to CCBC. I mean, this again goes back to coming out and being pretty secretive about that in high school. So it wasn't an identity that I felt very comfortable expressing initially. But when I encountered other LGBTQ students, that was a really great experience for me, just to have that support. And there was a professor, Dr. Morgan Slusher, who I think he was the faculty mentor for the Rainbow Club. And I was able to attend meetings there a few times while I was there. So it was great that that resource was available to students like myself, where we could talk about just things that we were experiencing. And it was very validating. And again, going back to kind of building that confidence, that helped me to also interact with students who weren't part of that community, and feel better about that without feeling like I had to be so secretive.
So the Rainbow Club was a space where you could feel like more open and more comfortable just talking about who you really were. Um,
Absolutely.
and other than the Rainbow Club, were there any other support systems or resources that were available to LGBTQ students at the time?
I can think of the Rainbow Club definitely comes to mind, which was wonderful. And I think, we're talking the early 2000s, so we didn't have there wasn't much of a social media presence. So, we couldn't get connected that way, but definitely talking to professors was really important. You kind of seek out the professors that are going to be supportive and who are going to really be accepting of who you are as a person. So I think in terms of the resources, those are the ones that come to mind.
So could you tell me a little bit more about the student clubs that helped you meet other members of the community? I know you talked about Rainbow Club, but could you talk a little bit more about the other clubs?
I was part of theater at CCBC, which was great. I really had more connections with people in the community through that, doing shows, working with stage crews. So that was a really good experience for me as well. And just to socialize with students outside of classes. I did shows, I think, for 3 semesters while I was at CCBC. So it gave me an opportunity to do something extracurricular while I was there. But again, these really important connections.
So while you were at TCBC, were you only part of the Rainbow Club and theater and the theater community, and that's it?
I was also a member of Phi Theta Kappa, and it's been a while, but I do believe that I served in a leadership position for that organization. There were times where I can think of working with some people in Phi Theta Kappa where I didn't feel so welcomed or so supported. That was more with students who were part of it. But even with that, I mean, there were just a few instances of that. Generally, that was a positive experience too.
So in school, it seems like you're like mostly focused on theater and being involved with that. And could you tell me how your involvement in theater helped you be more comfortable with your identity?
I think just having the interactions with people and seeing how they were expressing their identities, and it kind of, in a way, gave me permission to do the same. Yeah, theater it's a wonderful experience because you really tap into your internal world. And so you start to see what a lot of other people from the community were dealing with as they were expressing themselves. So not only does that kind of drive some of the the work that they're doing in the theater, but also it's a way of just kind of connecting with one another and also offering support to one another too.
And were there any specific memories about your time in theater that highlighted the LGBTQ, like the LGBTQ community's presence, like maybe a character you played or a role or both?
When I was in Carl's class in acting one, we did a scene from Waiting for Godot, and I played Vladimir. And the way I wanted to play that character was this very, I mean, not to be stereotypical, but very flamboyant character. And it was it was fun to be able to do that and to feel that safety to kind of, express myself that way was really great. And then when I was in The Picture of Dorian Gray in, I guess that was 2001, I had the honor of playing Dorian Gray. And there was a scene in the play where Dorian Gray blackmails one of the characters because they've had one of the male characters blackmails him because they've had a sexual relationship. And to be able to be in that role and to act that out on stage was very interesting. I hadn't really done things like that in previous theater experiences.
So in theater club, you talked about how it was a safe space and how you felt welcomed. And could you tell me a little bit more about how exactly that club was a safe space for you and other LGBTQ members?
I think it's all about the faculty who lead it, and that makes a world of difference. And so the faculty members who were in leadership positions for the theater department, I think they've really fostered a safe space for many members of the LGBTQ community, whether they identified themselves that way or for students who identified that way. When I think back to my experiences at CCBC, that it's those times being connected to theater is where I felt the most safe and most comfortable to really just be myself. I could truly just relax. And that was another healing experience because I didn't have that when I was in high school.
Did you form any like lasting friendships or connections within the theater club that were particularly meaningful to you?
There were some people, and to this day, there are some people that I maintain connections with. Some identify as members of the LGBTQ community, and some don't. But it's been nice to have those lasting friendships from our days being in theater at CCBC. When I take a step back, it's really cool to think about that because we're talking, over 20 years that we've stayed in touch. So yes, I have had some of those contacts over the years.
So theater was a pretty impactful experience for you at the college. Touching on some other points, like Rainbow Club, that you talked about earlier in the interview. Do you like remember like any topics that were discussed during Rainbow Club or anything like that that made you like feel like this is the place for me to be here and this is like the place where I should, keep coming back because obviously you went to more than one meeting. So what was like that moment and how did it feel like?
Well, first, I think it was the novelty of, for me at least, to be a part of a group like that. Things are very different. A lot of high schools, they have, organizations for LGBTQ students. And I mean, certainly I didn't have that in high school. So to have a group like that on campus was incredible. It's like I couldn't even fathom that something like that could be held. So that really helped to challenge some of my views on things. And I think in terms of topics, I mean, as I recall, the group would have covered a broad range from struggles with coming out, struggles with being out. There may have been times where we talked about media representation of the LGBTQ community. What were we noticing? What was positive? What was negative? So it just kind of gave us a space to talk about these things. We may not have been able to talk about these things in classes. Not that they weren't welcomed, but just it may not have been the time to talk about some of those things. So to have a space to talk about various topics related to the community was great.
So it sounds like CCBC was what you needed for you to, truly feel comfortable. And could you tell me how CCBC helped you become your most authentic self?
I think just CCBC really provided the corrective experiences that I needed at that time in my life. Being, 17, almost 18-year-old high school student coming out, where it was not a very good experience, that impacts someone. And I certainly know that I was impacted in a negative way. So much so, as I said earlier, I felt like I couldn't really be out that much. So CCBC really kind of provided this environment where I could just be and play around with my identity and see what that would be like for me to express my true authentic self. And I carried that with me when I went on to get my bachelor's degree and degrees after that. So I think in so many ways CCBC it's where it starts for me in terms of being my authentic self.
In what advice would you give like current LGBTQ students navigating their college experience at CCBC or just in college in general elsewhere?
I would say for students in the community to always seek out support. It's there, and that's important. Those connections will be critical if they are struggling, even if they're not struggling. I think those connections are really important. You know, maybe this is the the psychologist coming out, but we do have this need of twinship, where we want to find people who are similar to us. I think groups like the Rainbow Club, or even Theater Club, or seeking out professors who have a shared identity or similar identities, that's just crucial to one's development, but also acceptance of their self too. And I think that's what it's all about.
You said how your experience at CCBC affected your personal life and how everything turned out. Could you tell me a little bit more about that, but maybe focusing on your career?
Sure. So when I was a student at CCBC, I was there to take some gen ed courses before going into architecture school. And, that was the dream. I was going to be an architect. And my first semester, I took a Psych 101 class, and I thought, wow, this is really interesting. And I started taking some other gen ed courses that may have been psychology adjacent. And I thought, wow, this is really exciting. I really want to explore this more. And so at some point I said, I don't want to go to architecture school anymore. I really just kind of want to be in the space and explore what I might like to do academically, especially with psychology. And so a lot of my courses were focused on psychology while I was at CCBC. And I took some gen eds while I was there too. The honors program at CCBC was fantastic. And I tried to take as many honors courses as I could. And the classes were smaller. I think it was just the right environment for me. And plus, we could have more discussions because the classes were smaller. So there's more of like an intimacy in those classes. But my time at CCBC really sparked my interest in psychology. So when I eventually got my associate's degree and then moved on to, get my bachelor's degree and beyond, I felt very confident that psychology was the career path for me. And there was some, recalibration along the way before really deciding that I wanted to be a psychologist, but I knew I had a passion for psychology, and that started while I was at CCBC.
Thank you for sharing that. And now, so currently, are you like involved in any LGBTQ plus organizations or initiatives outside your work?
Well, in my professional organizations, so I currently serve as the diversity chair for Northern Virginia clinical psychologists. And so there's a lot of awareness that I try to bring to the psychologist community down here in terms of LGBTQ issues. One thing that I do like to do that's very meaningful for me is to provide trainings on affirmative psychotherapy with the LGBTQ community and teaching that to other psychologists. So that's been really good. And actually, in my work that I do, I mostly work with adults, but I would say a good chunk of the folks that I work with doing therapy are members of the LGBTQ community. So it feels good to kind of help those individuals if they're in need of any mental health service. So that's been really rewarding for me.
Do you feel like now you're like more outspoken and more of like an advocate for like LGBTQ individuals than you were, like back then at CCBC where you were just like coming to terms with like who you were and the community and all that stuff?
Yeah, I feel like my role as a psychologist is to really be an advocate for the people I work with, especially those in the LGBTQ community. So I work hard at really trying to prevent people from going through experiences that I may have had, either in high school or even in adulthood, or supporting them if they have gone through similar experiences. So yes, now that I am more out and proud, so to speak, I do have that confidence to serve in that role with people to further assist them in their journeys.
Thinking back and reflecting on your time at CCBC, are there any like programs or anything else that you think students could benefit from now that you're a psychologist, like from that perspective, like do you think there should be resources here at the school that could help students, be successful if they're part of the LGBTQ community or anything like that?
I'm not sure if there are resources currently at CCBC available to this community, but I would say my hope would be that there are more trans community specific resources available. I think sometimes that community gets lost in the general acronym, and they really, folks from that community, they really do deserve a lot more attention and support. So my hope is that if those resources aren't available, that they can be available at some point.
Thank you. And like that was the last question I had for the interview. Like thank you for your time and for answering all my questions.
You're very welcome, Holly. It's an honor to do so.